Shalom, and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. This is the first Parsha of the year, Parshat Bereishit. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamed, speaking to you today from the library of the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. With me, as always, Rabbi Barry Chesler and Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky. It's great to see you.
Great to be here.
I think I want to say Shana Tova because this is really when the Shana begins. The year begins with the new cycle of Torah reading. We want to jump right into this. Bereishit, I want to say that we could spend hours on this Parsha. And one of the great laments that I have every year at this Parsha is that it takes 45 minutes to read. And in 45 minutes, we go through thousands of years of human civilization. So the first question I want to ask is, how do we understand this Parsha? What is the arc of this Parsha? Where does it begin, and where does the Parsha leave us? And
well, it should be noted first that the ark won't appear till next week.
Indeed, the arc will be next week.
That's the ark with a K.
That's okay. The arc with a K.
So the narrative arc, please, the narrative arc. Where does it begin? Where does it end? And what do we find on the way? Jeremy, take this.
So first of all, I want to note that this is fun for us for lots of reasons, but one of them is, as everybody who's watching this knows, we got started doing this at camp. It's the summer Parshiot. We did kind of begin when the pandemic began with those winter Parshiot, but this is new for us because we've talked about many Parshiot, but none of them in Genesis. So we get to have, the three of us get to exercise some muscles that we haven't done before. So very excited for that. I would note that the Parsha's arc is a very religious tension between a perfect divine and an imperfect world. So Genesis chapter 1 is an incredibly orderly, thoroughly monotheistic description of an infinitely powerful, omnipotent God's ability to just say, let there be light, and there's light, and let the chaos, whatever sense is tohu vavohu is a kind of primordial chaos. Maybe it is, or maybe it isn't, but God certainly masters it, and there's nothing oppositional about it. God just says, okay, let the dry land appear, and let the apple trees grow, and let the fish appear, and God is in control of everything. And the capstone of Genesis 1 is Vayar Elohim et kol asher asa v'hinei tov me'od. God looks at all that God has done, and it's excellent. It is very, very good. But by the end of Genesis, after rebellion in the garden, and the first murder, and the first sets of genealogies, and the first sets of crimes, God looks at the human being and says, I'm really sorry that I made you, and your Yetzer Lev Adam rak kol hayom, the human impulse is just bad all day long. So I think that, for me, the interesting religious part of this arc in these first chapters of Genesis has to do with the goodness and order, which is real, because that is what it is to believe that there is a God and that there is order in the world. But it is to say the very, very least, imperfectly realized in the creatures that actually live in the world.
Barry, you want to take a shot at that?
Sure. There's a great majesty in the first chapter and the first few verses of chapter 2, which have the passage about Shabbat. And once we get to the Shabbat piece and we begin the so-called second story of creation, I'm reminded of the quotation from Casey Stengel, who was the first manager of the New York Mets. They had a terrible year, their opening year, and he's musing, can anyone here play this game? So in chapter 1, this is God's world. It's emblematic of a perfect God. There's nothing that's out of place. There's nothing that one would do differently. Once we get past that, no one can do anything right. What's striking is the absence of good in the world that is populated by human beings. Goodness can't be given, it has to be earned. You have to sin and then recover or repent, and then you could get back on track. But that's the nature of being human. When you look at chapter 1, I sometimes wonder if does God really need that world? That's not all that different than what one might imagine God's existence without human beings is. But God needs human beings. We also need human beings, both large and small. And the stories that unfold after this perfect creation reflect that deep need for being human and asking ourselves, what actually is it to be human? What does it mean to live in this imperfect world?
Well, I think I might take a little issue with that and say that chapter one represents an aspirational world, and that chapter one, especially when it refers to on the sixth day when God creates the human being, Naseh et Adam b'tzalmenu kidmutenu, let us make the human being in our image after our likeness, and give that human being all sorts of power. And then verse 27, which is the climactic verse, Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam b'tzalmo, God created the human in his image, male and female, he created them, Zachar nekeva baraotam, vayevarechotam, and gives them that blessing, and that there is this great human dignity that is imprinted upon human beings, of being free, of being morally free, of being powerful, of having the ability to have dominion over things, and it does represent an aspiration. In fact, I think built into Judaism is the aspiration that we return to that on a weekly basis. After all, Shabbat is a recollection of creation. So I guess it's not that I want to live in chapter one, but I want to see in chapter one something that's indispensable for us. And of course, it's aspirational. Of course, we are always fighting against chaos. I think the themes of chapter one of Bereishit are the bedrock themes of human civilization.
I certainly agree with that, but I think that I think that in the stories that follow, is where it really gets interesting. So, to me, the stories of failure are just so rich and suffused with the struggle to be that fully realized human being. So I firmly agree with that. This is the dialectic of religion. To believe that there is a God of order and a God who is good, and in fact the paradigm of goodness, and that the world is hine tov me'od. It's absolutely necessary to be a religious person. But also to be a religious person is to reckon with, for example, I mean, what to me is just, oh, it's such a powerful religious story. Adam violates, and futile and infantile tries to hide in the trees from God, who says, "Where are you?" And Adam is called upon to answer. So to me, that story is the dialectical tension of, yes, God says you are B'Tselem Elohim, and Adam says, "Excuse me, I'm going to hide in the trees now."
Yeah, but what does he know? And I mean, as we study this text, and as we teach this text, and I can imagine teaching it with, adolescents and kids who see that it's really not his fault. What would you do? What would you do in
Well,
this situation? I mean, of course, every human being is gonna eat. You say no to someone, and that's what they're gonna do. You're gonna.
what he knows is that he sinned, because as soon as he eats the fruit, he changes.
Yeah.
And I think for me as a teacher, for you as rabbi, pulpit rabbis, a different kind of teacher, that's what education is. It's the change, is that we don't want to remain the same. We want to be someone different. And that comes with a price, because we realize that who we were in the past is not who we become or who we want to be.
So let me ask you, just as the student question, which is, what does Adam learn then when he eats, and what does Eve learn then? What is that moment about?
So I would say the answer to that, by the way, is not to be found in the question that you posed a minute ago. Like, well, what did you expect? Of course, there's going to be a sin, because this is the Torah's story of having to leave the infantile paradise to contend with the world as it is. Okay, so to me, the question of what Adam has to reckon with is the tragic quality of his own failure, which is absolutely this is real. Okay, he doesn't belong in paradise, he belongs in the world. And so he learns that he has to get dressed, go out, and go to work. Okay, and Eve learns that, to maybe to hew too closely to the text, Eve learns that love and intimacy and sex is going to bring pain and death also. This is the tragic reality of this story, and that's what makes it so human. And we could apply the same set of questions to the first murderer. What does Cain learn? He learns that he thinks he can try to get out of this, but he can't get out of this. He has to confront the guilt that is a part of being a human being.
I think there's a self-awareness, there's a maturation, it does reflect everything that we need to have reflected in us. I'm going back to you, Barry, which is, what do you want when you teach this, when you teach these stories? What do you want your students to learn from them?
So Adam and Eve, I think, is a number of etiologies. It comes to explain a number of phenomena that struck our ancestors as in need of explanation. So, for example, women, females, human beings, are the only mammals that experience pain in childbirth. Why do women do that? And the reason, I think, is found in my favorite museum, the American Museum of Natural History. It's the size of the brain that has expanded almost beyond the capacity of a human being to deliver. As you know, the head is what comes out first in a human being, and that is the largest part of the baby. With other mammals, the head is not as wide as the shoulders, so it makes it easier physically. So that's one piece of it. Another piece of it is that they're not embarrassed when the story begins because, as Jeremy said, they're like little kids. Little kids run around naked on the beach, as we all know, because they don't experience any embarrassment until they reach puberty. And that's when how you look becomes very important. It's important that you're dressed, and how you dress is also important. And the third thing I would say is that you don't need children unless you know, either in some conscious way or unconsciously, that you're going to die. That the act of having children is intimately linked with death. If Adam and Eve had remained in the garden in their infantile paradise, which I agree 100% with Jeremy, they would be it. That would be the end of the story, because everything is handed to them. And that's paradise for a little kid, when something is handed to them. For us, we want to work for reward, and that working for reward comes with all sorts of prices. The work itself is hard, gathering food is hard, living with each other is also very hard. I suppose that's really part of the story of Cain and Abel, that it's hard for two people who do different things to live together.
Well, let's turn to Cain and Abel now, and Jeremy, what is driving for you in this parsha is the human drama. I think part of our orientation to this parsha is that while chapter 1 reflects a perfect aspirational world, I think the stories of Adam and Eve and their awareness, and Cain and Abel and the first murder certainly reflects not aspirational terms, but reality. And I want you to share with us. I want you to relate to that, and it's heartbreaking, and I think you elicit a sense of pathos in these stories.
Yes. So in Genesis 4, we have the story of the birth of the two children. By the way, the sexual component of the story, like as if the Garden of Eden story is the introduction of sexuality, is as the Jewish commentator literature make clear, by virtue of the verb structure in Genesis 4, we know that the children were born in the garden. It's not Vayeda Hadam et Chava Ishto, it's V'Hadam Yada et Chava Ishto. The human being has already sexually known Chava, the wife, so they've had the children. And the first one is called Cain, and Eve says, "Vatomer kaniti ishat Adonai." I have created this created this person along with God. Vatosef laledet et achiv, and then she has another child, et Hevel, and his name is breath.
Yeah.
The first one is named creation and has a strong sense of permanence, so to speak. And the other one is called Havel, is just like it's evanescent in breath, and it might go away. In fact, it will go away. So Hevel becomes a shepherd, and Cain becomes a farmer, and uh, and Cain works the land, brings an offering, and Hevel, almost as an afterthought, brings his offering, but God pays attention to Hevel's offering and likes it and rejects Cain's offering. So the first feature of this, or a feature of this, is that the world has treated Cain a little badly. And Cain, he's doing his best and seems to have been very diligent in working and even in offering, and it's not working. Well, what's up with that? Why isn't it working? And in his rage, his mute rage, because he says he doesn't say what he says, what Cain says to Abel, but he just in rage kills him. And so one of the things that I find very fascinating about this story is our reactions, or is as an archetypal human being, Cain's reaction to feeling that sense of rejection by God. I think that a rich spiritual life has moments of great intimacy with the divine and also a sense of alienation. And at the time of alienation, he turns into a kind of violent rage. And I find that, strangely and disturbingly parallel to what we see around in the world around us. When people get resentful, they get violent, and that's Cain's response too. God will ultimately say to Cain, "This is the battle of your life. Sin crouches at your door, and sin desires you. Sin is a yetzer hara, will desire you. Vatatim shobo, but you can and must rule over that."
In a way, I think I concur with that in the sense that there is a tremendous sense of arbitrariness, a tremendous sense of disappointment. But it's not only vengeance that Cain is being motivated by, but it's also, I think it's the need for attention. Abel got attention almost for free, although I would have to argue that the idea of being a shepherd in a world in which God has already issued a kind of ordinance that says you're only going to eat fruits and vegetables. You're essentially going to be vegetarian. Seed-bearing plants, grasses, fruits, vegetables, you are to be vegetarian. And here, already by the time that these boys are mature and having their occupations, Cain is adhering to that divine command, and Abel has taken a different tack here. We could talk about the food aspect of this, that a very efficient way of nutrition and protein is certainly eating meat, and that short circuits a lot of things and enables Abel to do other things. I mean, as a shepherd, you're not only watching your sheep, you can play a flute, you can tell stories, you can dream a little bit. I mean, we have a certain romantic picture of the shepherd, and it's not an accident that our ancestors were all shepherds, and that Abel was innovative because he pushes out against a divine ordinance, and that the act of sacrifice, the shedding of blood, the taking of life for the service of God, is what causes God to take note. And it's that idea of God taking note that Cain is really upset with. And I imagine the drama unfolding as follows, which is, oh, so God, you like the shedding of blood, or you are responding, not you are responding to that. Let me show you something that's even much more. I will, and here I'm interpreting the story as almost a premeditated murder. You want to see blood? You want to see violence? You want to have something that will draw your attention? Here's what I'll do. I'll take this other brother that I have, and I will slaughter him. And now, here, God, I'm showing you. It's a very dark picture here, but if attention is what we're after, absolutely, Jeremiah. I think violence, there's no other way to draw your attention. It's not an accident, as far as I can see, that when people are expressing their total frustration and unbridled, they are resorting quite easily to violence. Barry?
So I read this story quite differently,
Yeah.
and I start with Hevel's name.
Yeah.
He's a wisp because he's actually inconsequential. He's necessary for the story. Cain has to kill someone, but we're not supposed to really think about him too much. Just like in the Akedah, we don't really think about Isaac so much until the rabbis come and rename the test of Abraham, the binding of Isaac. And we certainly don't think about Sarah, who undergoes similar emotions as Abraham and is never mentioned in the story. So that because the story of the Akedah is about God and Abraham, Isaac is necessary, but not really part of the story. Cain kills Abel in order to inflict pain on God. God has inflicted pain on him by denying him his offering. And I like to think of Cain as going into his father's business, and he has some disabilities. He's not able, of course. He is Cain. And the earth that he tends is not productive because that's the curse that God put on the earth as a result of the sin in the garden. And so, of course, his offering cannot be as good as Abel's. What's interesting is that Abel's offering is not something that he made himself. It's something that he takes, right? The shepherd doesn't make sheep, he just tends to them. Whereas Cain, I think, is more intimately involved in the growth of the crops. And he seeks to punish God. I'd like to teach this story with the story of the two women and Solomon, because we all know the story. The two women give birth to a baby 3 days apart. One of the babies dies, and the mother of the dead baby takes the other baby. And then at the key moment in the story, when she has a chance to get the baby, she says, no, kill it. And the reason why she wants it killed isn't explained in the story. But I think what we're supposed to get from it is that her response to pain is that she wants someone else to feel her pain. And so she doesn't want the baby because she wants to be a mother. She'd rather have the other woman's baby dead so that woman can feel her pain. And in a similar way, Cain wants God to feel his pain. And I think there's a recognition of this at the end of the story because God changes the punishment of Cain. And I just want to add one more detail about the punishment. Originally, Cain is supposed to be a wanderer. So in effect, God makes Cain into Abel, the shepherd, because the shepherd wanders, doesn't stay in one place. But ultimately, Cain ends up in a city.
So I would take issue with that only in the sense that as an act of manslaughter, Cain has to live in perpetual exile. And if we are connecting acts of manslaughter later on in the Torah, one in practice and one in theory, I would say Moses lives in perpetual exile as having committed manslaughter with the Egyptian, and theoretically, the person who commits manslaughter has to live in a city of refuge, exiled from the rest of the community. So Cain cannot live in civilization. He must be in permanent exile. But as you state correctly, he becomes the founder of the cities, or at least his descendants do. And look, I mean, obviously, this is our machloket. Our machloket is the debate of who the victim is, and well, not who the victim is, but what are the motivations here? I'm tempted to see Abel as a proto-Jew in the sense that he is innocent. He tries to innovate, and there is a certain rage that is irrational from Cain, and it's all about drawing that divine attention to him.
Given the fact that Elliot, you were talking earlier about the sort of paradigm quality to Genesis 1, and we will later on next week in Noach hear that the spilling of human blood, that if somebody spills human blood, they must also have their own blood spilled by human means, as a justified death penalty. It is interesting that in this story, Cain is not given that penalty, even though he has in fact destroyed the human being B'Tselem Elohim.
Right.
So the echo immediately after we hear that B'Tselem Elohim, that the human being is created in the image of God, is the destruction of that Tselem. It seems that there's a contending with the fragility of the creature in the divine image, and to me, this is really a super interesting part. Also, Barry said he goes into his father's business as a chaklai, as an agriculturalist, which is true. Also, he follows his father in another way, is that each of them have sneaky, weaselly ways of talking with God. God says, where were you, Adams? Ayeka. And Adam says, I was hiding. I was afraid. And God says, where's your brother? And he says, not my job. Cain says, Hashomer achi anochi? Am I my brother's keeper? The answer, of course, is yes, you are. You must be. But that sneakiness that we B'nai Adam have, that we typically lie our way out of things, and that's one of the moral challenges that this parsha poses to us.
Let's. I want to just go back to something you said, Jeremy, earlier, and draw out the ending of the parsha, since our time is coming to an end here, and that the arc of the parsha moves, I guess, from what you can say, great hope, the great promise of creation, to dismay. I want to say it's hard not to feel a sense of pathos for God, and it's hard not to feel, God as the character, God as the main character. Although everything is going to focus from here on in on the behavior of human beings, God is a central character here, and God has to find comfort. And so, give us the sense, give us some kind of comfort here. How does the parsha end with comfort, and where is it going to take us as we go forward, Jeremy?
So we have the genealogy of the various descendants, including the famous Methuselah, Metushelach. As I grow older, I identify more and more with Metushelach. Just feeling so old. But my kids call me Metushelach. Yeah, rotten kids. But when Noach is born, Lemach names him Noach. This one will comfort us from our misbegotten deeds and from the sadness in our hearts. And that, so we have an augur, or a little foreshadowing, that Noach is going to be the person who prevents God from giving up on humanity, right? God does pretty much give up on humanity and give the world his great bath and start all over again. But Noach has this name which signifies that we're not totally giving up, and there's going to be a seed of a new beginning. Now, I want to just point out that those same words, those same roots, will kind of resonate just a few verses later when God does give up on the world, and it says, "Vayinachem Adonai ki asa et hadam ba'aretz vayit'atzev el libo." God regretted having made the human being in the world and was sick at heart, or sad at heart. So there's a kind of match between Noach and his capabilities and the despair and sadness of God. And interestingly enough, the Torah puts Noach's name first and then describes in those very same Hebrew roots the sadness and despair of God. I think to say, don't worry, guys, at least moderately happy ending coming. But God is going to be despairing and sick at heart about the failures of the human beings. And we're going to have to wait till next week to realize that even though most of the world needs a washing away, there is in it the seed of the beginning again. This is Parshat Bereishit, and next Parsha will be, Lahatchil mi Bereishit Shenit, the beginning from God, beginning from all over again the second time.
Barry, you want to?
So what I continue to think about is that one would think that God would start over again, because Noach is a new beginning in one sense, but he is also of the seed of Adam. And he carries with him all that Adam represents, which is the seed for his own destruction. And the next time around, the same thing's going to happen on a different scale. We're going to have 10 generations that are also going to go downhill. And this time, God will choose Abraham to start again. And I think that we have a twofold movement here. It's God also becoming self-aware. He also seems to be learning that human beings are not what he thought they were. And whatever joy they bring, they also bring great sadness as well, but you can't get rid of them.
Yeah.
And I think that in a sense, that's what's supposed to comfort us, that we have valleys, we reach lows, but we are all that there is in the ontological sense, I guess. And we are hopeful about the future, that we can, as you said at the beginning, Elliot, we can aspire for that world of order in chapter 1. We can make the end just as the beginning.
So that's a good place to leave our talk today, because that's exactly where the parsha ends. It's the Noach matzachen b'nei Adonai. It may not be, the promise of perfection, but that promise of perfection has already transformed itself into at least the potential for goodness, the potential for kindness, the potential for some kind of grace in a human being. But Noach matzah chen. How would you translate the word chen? What would be a good found favor? It says in our translation, chen is something good.
I like grace.
Grace. So we start off with total hope that crashes, but a possibility for human kindness.
So grace and the kind of a love that just blossoms forth. It's not called by anything. Noah is a recipient of it because of God.
Yeah.
Elie Wiesel said, that for a Jew, maybe he said it for all human beings, but my recollection is this: for a Jew, the secret is not beginning; it's beginning again. And I think that's a really powerful comment in these passages. Bereishit Aleph, the first Genesis chapter 1, is the beginning, and the everything that comes after that reminds you. By the way, Bnei Adam u Bnei Chava, you are going to have to begin all over again all the time.
So here we are. This is such a wonderful note to end on, because here we've begun again reading the Torah, and we've left the parsha. We're leaving the parsha where, in fact, all human civilization has to begin again. And so we're going to begin again. And we invite you to write to us. We invite you to speak to us, whatever. You can call us or write to us at Parsha Talk, Parsha Talk @gmail.com. Jeremy set up this beautiful email today. Parsha Talk.
That was very creative of me to do it in Gmail. I felt
it's total creativity.
Yeah.
We'll produce that, and we look forward to seeing you next week on a future.
We'll see you next week. If you want to, I was thinking, folks, that to our many listeners, if you wanted to send us a question, we could try to address it, or just you wanted to send us like cash on Venmo, we could do that. Anything that you want to do.
All right. So we want to say Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
It's great
Shalom.
to see everyone, and the beautiful, beautiful cycle of the Torah beginning now and beginning again. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbos.